Today I decided to pull the instrument cluster out of Casper and give it a good inspection. I know some of you might be thinking, inspection for the instrument cluster, why do you need to do that? Well, let me explain. This is particularly true on the W116, that was the S-Class sedans that were built from 1973 up to 1980 in the US market, and then the W123 from 77 to 85. These instrument clusters have one problem in common, and it can really sneak up on you and ruin your day. I've seen it actually cause grief for a number of people. So what I decided to do is, let's dodge a bullet here, let's pull the cluster out and let's take a good close look at it before that becomes a problem. There's a couple other things that you can check while you have the instrument cluster out, and it's not difficult to get out, particularly if you have these special dash pull tools that we make here in my shop. I've modified these over what was originally designed by Mercedes-Benz, and these have a spring-loaded bend in them as well as a better hook so that you can get in down on the sides of the cluster in the dash and pull it out without damaging it. A lot of times I've seen the faces pulled off, particularly on the W123. Somebody will get a hold of it in there with the wrong tool or the straight tool that you normally see, and they'll click onto that plastic face and break it off. So if you don't have this set of tools and you have one of these older Mercedes, this applies to 1972 right up into the mid to late 90s. These tools will work to remove the instrument cluster in your older Mercedes-Benz. And I include a complete video, highly detailed video on how to use these tools to get the instrument cluster out of some of the models. Some of the models like the R129 and the W140 can be a real pain to get out, and I show you a special trick in those instructional videos. So now I want to show you what I'm inspecting. I'm not finding anything wrong with the Casper instrument cluster. It looks real clean. But I've got a couple others here on the bench, and I'll show you what problems I found with those, particularly on a couple that I recently got on eBay. Whoops. When you do pull the cluster out, one of the first things you can inspect is this rubber seal around this inside edge. This is a serrated rubber seal that holds the cluster into the dash. There's no screws or bolts or anything else that hold it in place. So when this seal deteriorates, then the cluster is not going to stay. It's going to want to move out. You may see this on some of these cars. Now this one here is so hard you can't even bend it. This has probably been in a high heat environment, maybe California or Texas or someplace where it's gotten a lot of heat. And these will harden up. They're not available new, but you can get good used ones. I think if I take this one and put a screwdriver under it, I can't get it off because it's kind of stuck. But see, look, it just breaks off like that. So if you find this on your cluster, try to get a good used one. We do carry good used ones when I can find them on my website. But you want to get a nice soft one. This cluster here is an example of one that is in good condition. See, I can move it and pull it. It stretches and it's still soft, and you can see the serrations are still good. They've not been crushed down. So this is a good seal on this cluster here, and this will really help to hold it in tight to the dash. So that's a minor thing. It's more of a cosmetic thing, but the other things you want to check are, the potentiometer. This is a dimmer switch which wears out and gets corroded. I've got videos on my website on how to rebuild these. We have good used ones if yours is not working properly. And the other thing you can do is check the bulbs. What I find is if you pull the bulbs out, you want to look and see if they're kind of dark and black. They get kind of a burnt color to them. Just replace them. A lot of them get dirty. You just need to clean them. It's not necessary to replace all these bulbs, but if you've got the cluster out, the bulbs are not expensive. You get them all replaced, you're not going to have a problem with bulb failing, down the road here. You can just plan on that being good for the next quite a few years. But the big thing you want to inspect is the oil pressure gauge. And that's the one that can cause you grief. When it starts leaking, it actually can drip oil on your feet. That's right. This happened to my daughter. She had oil dripping on her feet. So I've heard it happen to a number of other customers. So you want to kind of catch this early. This one here has just started to leak. You'll see it actually come out the lower part here, if it's really bad, so this one is just beginning to weep. You can see the oil wetness when you pull these little lights out. Let's see if we can get this light out. You can see it. See, look at the oil there. See the amount of oil? This will cause your bulb contacts to fail and your lights won't work right. You'll even get oil in the potentiometer and that'll stop working. And then eventually it's going to drip on your feet. Now the seller should have divulged this in his description because this was obviously leaking oil. But he said, well, you know, there's no guarantee. But I think a lot of times, you know, on these eBay parts, I don't think people are being really honest. If they would say, look, this is a cluster that you could probably get some good parts of, but it is wet with oil in the back. You know, of course, he did say the plastic was broken off. But he explained the whole thing and totally avoided saying anything about the oil. And that's probably the most valuable part on this entire cluster is this oil pressure gauge. Now, these oil pressure gauges are replaceable as a complete unit, or you can replace just the part. We have parts available on my website. They're not new. This is not available new anymore, but I source good used ones, and then I have instructions which show you how to take this off, get this oil pressure unit out, and reinstall it in your cluster. This one's out of a W123. It says, you know, 82 is probably 82300D, and it's just started to leak. And this is a cluster out of a W116, which I recently purchased, and the seller said, you know, it's working. Of course, what does that mean, working? And this is what I really don't like. It's obvious this has been leaking oil, but somebody went in there with a rag, see that, and kind of wiped it away. They didn't clean it very good. They didn't try to hide it very good. But when you pull these light bulbs out, look at the amount of oil right here. So this is the unit that leaks right here. This pressure unit that moves the needle will start to leak, and it leaks, starts out leaking just a very little bit, and you will not know by the operation of the gauge because the gauge works fine. And when it first begins to leak, it's just a small amount, just barely wetting the backside. So this is why you want to pull your cluster out and inspect it. You want to spot this leak before it gets too bad, and you want to spot it early enough that you have time to kind of source a replacement part, because like I say, these are not available new anymore, and they're going to be harder and harder to find in good condition because I'm seeing so many of them, just like these two here, you know, recently purchased on eBay. Both of them are bad. A word to the wise, I don't need to say any more. This part here, I've learned how to take it out and replace it. And you can do it. I even provide a special tool which will allow you to get this needle off without bending it or damaging it. That's probably the hardest part. You have to actually pop the needle off and then take this face off and get in here and replace this part right here. This is the part that leaks. And this is the part I have available on my website along with that special tool and complete instructions on how to do this yourself. Be forewarned, if you have one of these W116s and W123s, I highly recommend you take your instrument cluster out and give it a good inspection.